Hello my friends, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Haley Hoffman-Smith and I am the friend that helps you bring your pipe dreams to reality through motivation and manifestation. Okay, so a pipe dream of my past that turned to reality using many of the same techniques that I teach was to give a TED Talk. I'm a motivational speaker. I'm usually on stages way more often than obviously this last year has permitted. And I always had wanted to give a TED Talk even when I had really bad stage fright. And believe me, I had really bad stage fright, which we'll talk about. But I had no idea what was really entailed within a TED Talk. And I actually might never do one again. Well, we'll see. I feel like I just got a vision of me saying that, flashing back sometime in the future. But I wanted to really dive into what is a TED Talk truly, why everybody wants to give one, why you should consider giving one, but also the truth behind what it's like to really give a TED Talk. So I got some questions on my Instagram about how I landed my TED Talks, how you can go about getting a TED Talk. So we'll start there. We'll start with some good old informational, motivational stuff for you to take out and go find a TED event. I'll say that there are two types of TED Talks. The first is a classic TED Talk where it's just TED, and that's when you think of the big TED stage. And then TEDx, the X denotes independently organized events. So this is when colleges or cities or towns or high schools decide to put on a TEDx event, and then on their own they host applications, auditions, and then put together the entire event. TEDx is usually what people do. When people say I gave a TED Talk, it's usually TEDx. That doesn't mean that it's not as credible. It's still credible, of course. TED Talk, like actual TED Talk, is the big stage. Like, it really doesn't get any better than that, but TEDx is still pretty good. And especially when you know the quality of time and effort that goes into it and how it can really be challenging to land one unless you follow these steps. It's no laughing matter. TEDx is a pretty big deal. So I got both of my talks, just very candidly, from kind of being in the right place at the right time, but from being a motivational speaker. I actually got both of my talks when I spoke at a Young Women in Leadership and Business conference at Harvard the fall after I graduated from college. So I was in front of a room of 300 high school girls for this big conference. I gave a talk on personal branding, and because of connections and relationships of people that were in that audience from different high schools, and then there was a headmaster from another academy that were there in that room and I met afterwards, it led that I was essentially invited to their TEDx events, which means they were independently organizing them. They were hosting applications for speakers, but they asked me, okay, we've seen you on stage. Can you come in and can you give a TED Talk? Which I was like, woo, let's do it. However, for all the other applications and how you usually go about it, which is fairly straightforward, the whole concept behind a TED Talk is that you need an idea that's original. Literally, that's the entire concept behind what a TED Talk is, which will put a lot of pressure on you at first. So my best piece of advice is to think simply. I'm gonna watch both of my TED Talks and react to them because I haven't watched them in a long time and I have changed so much since both of them. The first one was May 2019 and the second was December 2019. Even between that, I changed so much. But the first concept, which I'll talk about my first talk because whoo, that was a doozy. This was that whole idea of being big enough, feeling big enough. It was basically about imposter syndrome and feeling good about yourself where you are, even though there'll always be a bigger chair or a bigger role to fill in your life. Like, there'll always be an achievement you have your eye on and something that you feel like you've graduated from, but how can you feel content within yourself? Which was honestly and admittedly a pretty murky concept. And then my most recent TED Talk, my second TED Talk called Ditch the Plan, Live Into the Answers, was about what the title suggests. If you want to create your dream life, you have to ditch the plan. Like, stop trying to plan out everything because the biggest things in your life aren't things that you can plan for. And when you have really big dreams, it's not something that you can choose with complete certainty of it happening. You have to just blindly carry forth and trust that it can come to fruition. So I posit the 3 F's in that talk of 3 main ways that you can ditch the plan and find certainty and living into the answers and creating the reality that you most choose. It's funny because looking back at that second talk, that was really when I started to own the message around manifestation, which I had always used and applied to my own life and gotten a lot of success in, but I was honestly kind of afraid of talking about it in a public way because so many people think it's so woo-woo, and it's taken me a long time, I mean, I guess a year now, to really own it and really be like, okay, this is who I am, this is what I believe, this is how I authentically think I can help people. And so I would extend that same question to you. Do you need to be an expert on something? It's awesome if you have a background that lends itself to what your TED Talk is about, but like ditch the plan, live into the answers. There was no way that I could connect expertise there, right? I think instead you should think, what is really important for me to tell other people? Like, what do I most think other people should know? One way that you can think through this question is to ask yourself, if you were given a billboard and you could write or put anything on it and 3 million people were gonna drive past it every single week from now until the end of time, what would you want that billboard to say? What do you feel a burning desire for people to know and then apply to their lives? This could be based off of stories, things that you've experienced. As always, with any talk that you're giving, it's really important to have it be a ton of stories more so than facts. Like, you usually think, oh, you really need the research. Yeah, you need the research for sure. The research lends credibility and like why you should care to the talk as a whole, but think through the stories in your life and think through, based off of your stories, what do you want other people to know? And then simplify, simplify, simplify. I'm really scared to watch back my first TED Talk. I kind of avoid it like the plague because I was just really unclear. I mean, again, it was a very murky thesis of a talk. And I also think that's why that talk didn't do as well as the second one, because people really just need a simple concept that you're explaining in a way that's easy for them to grasp, easy for them to understand, and something that they can take forth in their life. Like, think about the most famous TED Talks of all time. It's because it was so simple and easy to understand and so transformational that people really took the concept, applied it to their lives, and changed their lives. And they're always like, you have to watch this TED Talk. And that's how it takes off, my friends. But as for the truth behind the TED Talks, giving a TED Talk is like a marathon. I mean, it is really one of the hardest freaking things you can do. And here's why. I'm a motivational speaker, right? So I'm no stranger to taking to the stage to talk about anything. But when you're a motivational speaker and you have your main talk that you do all the time, you can kind of get a little free with it. You can get a little laissez-faire with the content in the sense of, you know what each slide of your talk is trying to convey. So you can, play with it a little bit, because if you go off script and even if you mess up, I mean, whatever, the people in the audience are going to hear that, and you can correct yourself and change that right there up on stage, and it's more like conversational and casual. It's different with a TED Talk because not only are you in front of a live audience, but you are in front of a camera crew, and no matter if you do the best job of your entire life or the worst job of your entire life, they're gonna upload that exact footage to the official TED Talk website, and it will be there for all the time. Not only the website, but the YouTube. And because TED has such good SEO, everybody and their mother is gonna see it if they ever Google you, so no pressure, right? But on the flip side of that, obviously, is a massive opportunity, because being able to say that you did a TED Talk, being able to have it be something like a calling card if people are going to look you up, if you want a motivational speaking career, if you want to start a business, if you want to write a book. Like, it's just really important to have anything out there. I mean, any type of talk, but especially because a TED Talk carries with it so much credibility. It's like probably the equivalent of being featured in Forbes or going to a top tier college in the way that we're valuing these big name brands. TED is a big one, so it's worth it for sure, but I just want you to know what you're getting into. Say that you've decided, I'm gonna go for it, I'm going to apply. Haley has already given me the disclaimer about how much work it's gonna be, but she's also told me how much it can do for my career, so let's do this. Every single TEDx event has one main theme to it. So no two TED events are gonna be the same. So the two that I did, the first, it might've been about business, something about entrepreneurship more generally. And the second one, where I did ditch the plan, live into the answers, I think it was also about business. I was trying to make sure the talks that I wanted to give fit in well enough with the themes that they already decided upon. The issue with this that some people find is like, oh, okay, amazing. A college near me, a high school near me is hosting a TED event. But what if the theme doesn't match anything that I want to talk about? The themes are vague and open-ended enough that you can make a lot of things work for it, which is a good thing, because that means that right now, if you're watching this in the middle of the pandemic and nobody's hosting TED events right now, or you just want to spend some time preparing no matter what year you're watching this in, hopefully things are better in the future. I know they will be. We're manifesting it, optimism. Then you can spend some time on whatever idea it is that is percolating in your mind. Maybe you've channeled it already, maybe you just have a concept or an idea, or there is something that you have some expertise or some experience in, go for it. Start to work on it, start to hone it and turn it into a talk. Also know that you're gonna have to make little tweaks, just little ones, to make it fit into the application for an event. And I'll also say, I think TED Talks are worth traveling for. I traveled for both of mine. Again, it was a different thing. It's not like I was applying to Boston TEDx events when I was living in Denver. It just happened that because I gave this talk at Harvard, they were Boston-based schools. I got on a plane for both of my TED Talks, and I think that's worth it. Say that you've chosen a topic, you've applied with the topic. You don't have to apply with your entire talk. Usually they just want to know, okay, what are people in the audience going to get from your talk? So, I mean, you can kind of wing that, honestly. You can have some bullet points. You can have general ideas. The actual sitting down to write the talk and then memorizing the talk is a whole new animal. So the difference between my delivery of a TED Talk, but then also like a motivational talk, usually if I'm going to be a keynote somewhere, is that for the TED Talk, I memorized every single word, which means I wrote the entire thing out like it was an essay, which was actually good for understanding how this connects here and what all the slides are and just knowing the full thesis of what I was saying. That's the benefit of that. Memorizing a talk that is like anywhere between 12 and 20 minutes, that's long, that's hard. I did acting when I was growing up, so I remember I'd always memorize scripts that I thought was long, but nothing quite like a TED Talk. It's always at crunch time when you're practicing the most. Like, you can think that you are as prepared as possible, and then all of a sudden you are practicing it 2 days before the talk, and you all of a sudden realize that the talk is too short, or the talk is too long, or part of it doesn't make sense, or you actually can't memorize the middle of it for the life of you. Again, with that first talk though, big enough, I didn't even fully understand what the heck I was writing. I just remember being so frustrated. And that's where I think that needing to apply and come up with the idea first will be really good for you, because you have to figure out, what is it that I'm trying to say? I made it about Goldilocks and the 3 bears and the 3 chairs. Were there 3 bears? 3 chairs though, right? And there's one that's too small, too big, and then just right. I was actually speaking with a speaking coach about this because I was like, help, I'm so stuck in my own head. And she said, why don't you use those chairs? Because metaphors are a really great way to explain a concept to people. It's kind of like my EFT practitioner, Tiffany, always asks me, how would you explain this to a small child? Because sometimes we get really caught up in how smart and professional we want to sound when we're explaining certain concepts. But the major thing is that you want people to understand what it is that you're saying on the stage. Like, it's way more important that they understand what you're saying, as opposed to you sounding really high and mighty and prestigious. Both of my talks were at night, and both of my talks, I was like the encore. By the encore, I just mean the last in the lineup. Maybe that's because I was the oldest and the only one not from the general community in both events, but having to make it through the day, practicing all day, of course, like what? We're not gonna get up there and just wing it. And then sit in the audience for over an hour listening to other people give their talks and trying to breathe through it. Holy cow. Quick little EFT tip, if you just squeeze your ring finger right here, that can help with the nerves. I was doing that the entire time. I was like tapping, trying to get things out. I'm getting anxious right now just thinking about it. That was so scary, especially the most recent one. And then the moment comes and it's time for you to prance up there on stage. And the major thing, honestly, anytime you're doing anything scary, is just try not to think about, oh my gosh, I'm doing it, it's so scary. Funny story about my most recent TED Talk too was that literally the beginning went off without a hitch. It was so perfect. Everybody was laughing the entire talk. I just remember being up there and being like, I'm on fire, woo! And then at the end of the event, the sound people told me that my microphone wasn't working at first, so they needed me to redo, just for the sake of making sure they had the sound for the first portion of the TED Talk. Once they were going to submit it to the TED YouTube, it was probably the first 30 seconds of the talk. I was so mentally exhausted after, I couldn't get the first few lines of the talk right again. It was like, my brain was like, no. The other thing I'll say is, when giving a TED Talk, make sure you have eaten, even though like the last thing you want to do is eat when you're that nervous. I remember I had like an avocado milkshake and a hamburger before my last talk, and that honestly made all the difference. You need the protein, you need the protein. I'm gonna go ahead and watch back some of my TED Talk footage. I'm nervous. Let's see it, because life is about growth. I'm gonna watch the first one first. I'm pretty sure this is gonna be the biggest cringe. Let's do it.
So 5 years ago, I received a sign that I'm kind of a big deal. But before you think I'm some type of raging egomaniac, it was literally a sign that I received from my brother on Christmas.
That's cute.
And this sign has come with me from desk to desk, from my first 2 years at CU Boulder to Providence, Rhode Island when I transferred to Brown, to now at my adult desk at my home in Denver.
It's in here, it's in my room.
So the term that feels closest to what people often feel is not big enough. I also see it like in the Goldilocks story, which if we're talking about morality has some fuzzy lines. But remember, there's 3 chairs, all for the bears, and she comes up onto them. And the first chair is Big Bear's chair, and this chair is too small. And if you've ever sat in a chair that's too small for you, it's really uncomfortable. You feel like you're gonna fall out of the chair, you're gonna break it. And oftentimes we find ourselves in situations that we know that we're bigger than. We know that we're selling ourselves short. So what accomplishments do you feel like you can accomplish? What big chair?
What is this image? I made it in Canva.
Well, whatever you think, it's all a result of what you've been taught to believe about yourself and how you've perceived those experiences. So chances are you view yourself as much smaller than you actually are.
Subconscious programming at a young age. I was already talking about it. You can tell I messed up when I get a little fidgety.
And the day of the banquet arrived.
What is this slow zoom? What is this slow zoom?
No accomplishment could satisfy me. The idea of putting books in the girls' hands around the world did.
Oh no. Books in the girls' hands. This is on the internet forever. Please look how small that crowd is.
But I didn't fully realize how much the experience of starting this nonprofit had helped me until I attended my first ever networking event at the Four Seasons in Denver the following fall. But I wanted to be confident, so I still struck up a conversation with an older man who, for the purposes of this story, we'll call Hugo. And Hugo was, in every sense of the word, bigger than me. And then I told him about my humble idea of donating books to girls around the world.
Why did I get country? My humble idea.
A smirk of amusement. And he says, that is a tall order.
Oh, it still stings. That really did happen.
And this could have been one of those experiences that forever tarnished my view of myself and my company, right?
Almost
but
did.
I knew in that moment that he was wrong. I knew that I was so much bigger than what he thought of me.
Small chair.
So I looked back at him and I said, you're right, it is a tall order. And I'm fulfilling my first international shipment right now, and I walked away.
I don't think I had fully understood the full depths of how I really did use this like bigger or smaller than, like now holding the globe in my hands, whereas originally something felt like I was smaller than Mount Everest. Like that's actually, I really like that metaphor.
And I wrote in each book that I donated, you are without limits. Because to be without limits is to be the biggest of them all. So there's one chair we haven't talked about yet. It's the chair that Goldilocks ultimately chooses. See, she doesn't try to sit in Papa Bear's chair and say, like, I'll grow into it. And she doesn't say about Mama Bear's chair, okay, this will fit for now, this works. She says something very specific. It's just right.
I have chills.
Your life was never about being bigger. You are and have always been big enough.
That was so good. I forgot. I thought this was gonna be like major cringe fest. I was so emotional over here when I remember when I said it in the talk. I almost started crying. Like I thought I choked out the last word. I thought everybody would be able to tell that I was crying because I remember I looked in the audience, my mom was crying. But you can't tell, so that's good. Let's move on to numero dos. Ditch the plan, live into the answers. This was just, I look so different already in the frame. I mean, am I wrong? This was in December, so this was a mere 7 months later, not even a year later.
When I was 7 years old, I walked in the Nordstrom fashion
This
show
is the audio that was
at the
pre-recorded, or
which was the
recorded
most
again
glamorous
after.
thing I had done to date, and still probably
So you can
ever.
see it like doesn't link up.
Yes, girl, work it.
Now, all the kids were asked the same question when they got to the end of the runway. What do you want to be when you grow up? And I had watched all the other kids go, and they all said they wanted to be a movie star or a pop star or some version of a star. So I got to the end of the runway, and I proudly said, I want to be a marine biologist.
The picture is so nerdy.
There was a 2016 study that conducted how uncertainty impacts human stress responses. And it was done by hooking participants up to an electric shock machine. Don't worry, it was very minor.
You can tell I'm nervous because of my voice. I always thought I was gonna mess up this part because it's like a lot of research.
So there were 2 rocks that the participants saw, and one rock had a snake underneath. And their task was to choose the rock that did not have the snake underneath, or else they'd get shocked. Now, at the beginning of this experiment, they were coping with what we call irreducible uncertainty, which is the type of uncertainty that try as you might, you simply can't beat. It's as crazy and as random as going all in on number 17 on the roulette table in Vegas, which I don't recommend.
I actually realized when I came up with this, after I came up with this, sorry, like obviously I knew that I had said it because I practiced my TED Talk so many times. I rewatched one of my favorite movies ever, which is called, it has Queen Latifah in it, and it's called Last Holiday. I'm not gonna spoil it, but you definitely need to watch this movie. But she goes all in on number 17 on the roulette table, like again and again and again. And I love the number 17, but I didn't really like think anything of it, like using it in this. And then I rewatched the movie again later and I'm like, that's where I got it from. Cute sunglasses.
That our lives can turn out even better than any plan that we can come up with in our own heads. But I want to make something really clear before we dive in. And that's that when I tell you to ditch the plan and live into the answers, I'm not at all telling you to say cowbunga dude and sit back on your couch because you're not going to take care of the plan anymore. You still have to show up and show up fully without knowing what tomorrow looks like. That's one of my favorite quotes.
By Morgan Harper Nichols.
And so, show of hands.
This is one of my tricks. I say show of hands so I can get a deep breath in.
You were creating the bad day because of the frequency that you were showing up
Mic
with.
drop, Manifestation 101.
Essentially, it says that each human has a consciousness that emits a certain frequency. And that frequency then has to find resonance in its immediate environment.
This is like the science of manifestation before I started to call it manifestation or refer to it. Obviously, it's manifestation.
I was shown this in school and I'm very competitive, so I was really focusing on the number of times the ball was passed because I want to make sure I got it right. But in the midst of it all, you completely miss the gorilla walking in the background.
Have you guys seen this? It blows my mind.
The theory of selective attention or an intentional filter, which essentially says you only see what you're mentally focusing on.
Ooh.
So that's why if all of a sudden you want a gray poodle, even if you've never seen one out on the street before, you see them everywhere. The brain actually only processes 120 bits of information per minute, but tens of thousands of bits of information are being thrown at it. So it's only gonna focus on what will resonate with it.
Honestly, I just did that TV segment that I did earlier this week. I shared different statistics. 50 bits per second is what you can process, but you are receiving maybe like 11 billion bits per second. I guess this was per minute. I'm confused. Now I'm like, how does somebody really know this?
So how can we change our futures with focus? Focus on what you want, even if it's not certain. I think we get so scared that if we think a lot about what it is that we want and it only has a little bit of a chance of happening, then we're going to get attached. And as a result,
I hate it when I trip over my words.
But how is it going to happen if you don't see the opportunities to make it happen in your direct environment? You have control over that. My favorite show is called How I Met Your Mother. Maybe some of you guys have heard of it.
Typical of me.
And my favorite character's name is Marshall Erickson. And he grew up in Minnesota. And during the summers, his family would drive to the Upper Peninsula, and they'd get there really late at night. So he has this distinct memory of watching his dad drive, and there was no lights on the street. So he only had a few meters of headlights.
This is actually, I screenshotted this from Netflix.
And he remembers saying that he felt like his dad was some type of superhero that he could see in the dark. And in an emotional episode, his father tells him, "Marshall, I couldn't see worth a darn either. I just kept driving forward, hoping for the best." The truth is, we all only have a few meters of headlights in front of us. We have no idea what the darkness out there holds, but we do have an influence over what it does. If we increase our frequency, hone our focus, and lean into our feelings, we'll find that ditching the plan and living into the answers is truly the only way that we can live. Thank you.
Woo! And the crowd went wild. Neither of those were as cringy as I thought. I don't know why I expected it to be so bad. I have zero faith in my younger self. She was also far more academic than I am now, so. But I hope that was fun for you guys to watch with my reactions. I'm linking both full TED Talks below so you can watch both of them. Turns out I'm not really that embarrassed to share them. They're not as bad as I remember, except when I was tripping over the words. And I also have a podcast episode that I published months ago. I mean, this might have been a full-on year ago, about everything I know with applying to give a TED Talk. It's called Let's Talk TEDx Talks. How clever is that? So linking that below too, because I only got to a little bit of the information. All in all, I mean, I think it's pretty epic that these are going to be on the internet forever. I put a lot of time and effort into them. Of course, it was overwhelmingly stressful leading up to both talks, but I'm really glad I did them. I don't really know if I'll do another one again unless I come up with something that's like a burning, yes, I need to do this. For the first talk, that was kind of like, I had an idea in my head, but I didn't really know how to bring it to fruition, which is why it's a little bit murky and you'll just see the talk in general, it has more vague concepts and it kind of goes all over the place. Whereas the second talk, Ditch the Plan, Live into the Answers, literally wrote itself. Like that entire first part about metamorphosis and the fashion show, I don't feel like I came up with that. I feel like I channeled that. I will always really love this TED Talk because of that. So subscribe if you haven't already. I will be doing much more of these fun, casual, here's the truth behind X videos. Let me know what you want to see. And as always, tune in for the spiritual vlog on Sunday. Okay, bye guys.